Our mission.
Is everybody okay being recorded? Even though it means I don't get to see your beautiful faces.
You got my face. Look at it.
That's not your face.
Is it?
And it's
If
not
my
beautiful.
profile pic is working, that is technically me.
Oh, okay. I didn't look closely at it. I just thought it was a picture of a deer, and now I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
It's a deer with a
He's
gun.
got a gun, yeah.
A gun? I saw sunglasses.
That doesn't fire.
Oh, it is a gun. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
That's funny. I like that. And Caitlin's picture looks like it was the aftermath of that Vermeer parody that you made, Tina, with your cat. It's like the moment when the cat has shaken off the pearl earring and is managed to extricate herself from the...
Jeez, Seth is using big words. I just
I
don't
still
understand.
haven't figured out how to put a picture up.
Do you have Zoom downloaded?
Well, you could
On
just
my
use your
phone.
cam like I am. I'm the only one. I'm just putting myself out here. Look.
Seth,
Like-
I put myself out there too. Don't worry.
I'm scared to do that sometimes.
Okay.
I also have
Yeah.
cats that keep butting in, so
Shane Dawson might come and get you.
I hope he does. Shit, I'll be in LA right now. I don't have to go to school. He'll be paying for everything.
All right, I'm going to share screen.
My sister is listening in on this wonderful Zoom meeting, and she is laughing so hard.
I'm happy.
My work.
Well, we stand for Shane Dawson. Okay, that's it.
Yeah. Shane Dawson's going to watch this, I'm sure.
I hope so.
He's super into contemporary art,
I don't think he knows what contemporary means. Just to be
contemporary
honest.
art history.
That's probably true.
Oh, I love this woman.
So I got some fantastic discussion questions here.
Oh, dang it.
Few people. Could have been more, but Caitlin supplied some excellent discussion questions,
Thanks, Caitlin.
as did Chloe and Victoria and Kristen, none of whom I think are joining us here, but they're like here in spirit. Their questions will be discussed, even if they're not here to do any of the discussing. Okay, so Shirin Neshat.
That looks so photoshopped.
Yeah, it does.
Like,
Well-
really bad Photoshop,
Really?
though.
I mean, this is 1993, and it is definitely an altered image, right? With the text there. So what language is this?
Arabic?
Mhm.
So that's a good reasonable guess, I would say.
Wait, it's not. Is it Islamic? I don't know.
So Neshat is Iranian.
Oh, shit. Okay.
So the language that they speak there is Farsi. It's not Arabic.
Oh, that's right, Farsi.
And ethnically, they are not Arab, they are Persians, although Islam is the majority religion. In fact, it's the state religion, the official religion of Iran since the Iranian Revolution, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about today. And Neshat and her parents left the country during the time of the Iranian Revolution. There's a really amazing graphic novel and very harrowing graphic novel about the whole history of the Iranian Revolution, told from the perspective of a little girl who grows up in Iran.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about, too.
You know which one I'm talking about?
I don't know the name of it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm actually blanking on the name. It's the name of, it's like Persepolis, right? Persepolis.
I think so.
Yeah, that's the name of it. I almost had to go to the Googles. But yeah, Persepolis.
Oh.
If you're interested in the topic, I mean, it's really, it's hard to take. It's not like a lighthearted
Oh, no, it's not.
subject or a, whimsical kind of comic strip for youth. It's heavy hitting, but it gives you some perspective on what was going on in the country, the chaos, the dramatic social transformations that took place, and why a lot of people, especially members of the upper middle class, the educated classes, may have been impelled or pushed to leave the country at that time.
So this photo, is it from like her series of Woman is Allah?
Women of Allah.
Is this a part of her? Is that a part of that series?
Yeah,
or-
I think it is, and I'm not sure when she came up with the concept for this series. If it was after she started making the photographs, or before. But all of the photographs she produced throughout these years in the mid '90s have a lot of commonalities. So here's another one, which I would say, yeah, belongs to the same series, or at least is related. Rebellious Silence, 1994.
I know that with that series, she has really like symbolic elements to it too. Like she says, there's like 4 main ones, which is like the veil, the gun, and like we saw the first image was the text, which I think was from like a poem, and then the gaze, which was I don't think I've seen that one, but she said those are like kind of like the 4 important elements or symbols to this, I guess, the series that she's doing.
Right. Well, we can identify those elements in the various images here, right?
Yeah, I think like this one has it all, has the gun, the veil, like the text, which I think it is a poem, and then like her gaze of it.
Yeah. Right. And you have the gaze also here, really kind of the main focus, with the Farsi text contributing to the kind of hypnotic force of the eyes, which are, of course, all that is not, all that is visible of the woman's face because of the veil, or the chador. Yes, the poem. Does anybody remember what the context of this poem was?
I know the name of the poem.
What's the name of the poem, Tina?
I'll greet the sun again.
Would say that again?
I will greet the sun again.
I will greet the sun again. Okay.
It's from it's an Iranian poem. I don't know the guy's name, but I think he's old, but that's the name of the poem.
Yeah. And what does the author of the essay that we read, Lindsay Moore, have to tell us about some of the poetry that Neshat quotes or incorporates into these images? Does anyone remember? Let's see if we check that out. Where are those readings? Here we go. Yeah, so Moore is talking about Neshat's work, or examining it through the lens of exile, the artist's exile from Iran, which has to do not only with her family's departure from Iran, the outset of the revolution, but also the fact that she's not welcome to go back there, to work there. So although she has created a body of work that is set in Middle Eastern locations. They are all outside. The locations she's used are outside Iran. Yeah, Women of Allah, 1993 and 1997. And she talks about the gaze. Yeah, so some of the poetry that she uses includes extracts from a poem called Allegiance with Wakefulness from 1980. And the name of the poet, which I'll probably mispronounce, is Tahereh Safarzadeh. Tahereh Safarzadeh. That's hopefully not too rough approximation of the correct pronunciation of that name. And it's a militant poem. So it was written in reference to the revolution, written in 1980. In the aftermath of the revolution, but it tells it kind of commemorates the martyrs who are unsung or uncelebrated. So this one excerpt: stories of your martyrdom, like martyrdom of the people, remain unheard. They have no voice, no image, no date. They are unannounced. And the author goes on to talk about the importance of martyrdom in to the Shia branch of Islam, particularly in the late 1970s, when the values and cultural kind of norms of the previous regime under the Shah, the ruler of Iran, were challenged. So the Shah was like the hereditary ruler, regarded as corrupt and essentially as a puppet of Western interests. He promoted the cause of modernization in Iran, and so in reaction against the, inspired by dissatisfaction with the regime, with the regime of the Shah, a more kind of militant expression of Islam was mobilized in the political arena. Now, it's maybe very interesting and helpful to know a little bit about the source of some of these texts and the content of some of these texts. But it's equally important to consider the fact that Neshat herself is addressing that she's not, an artist based in Iran. Her audience is not primarily made up of Iranians. She has made her career in Europe and the United States. And so the majority of the viewers who are encountering Neshat's work will not be able to read this text, not have any idea where it comes from, and not know the content of it, or maybe even understand much about the context in which these poems are written. So how does that factor into our response to these works? If we don't know what the text is made up of, if we don't maybe even know what language it is, it's a natural assumption when we see images of veiled women accompanied by text here in the West to assume that it's Arabic if we don't know anything more about the cultural background of the artist, or the society that is being referenced here. So, what can we make of this image, or what are Westerners likely to make of this image? What kinds of associations is the artist evoking with this combination of elements, the gun, the writing, the veil, and the gaze? How do these play off of Western, Western representations of Islam or of Islamic women, Muslim women, Middle Eastern women, do you think?
I think, in my opinion, I think for us, we don't really see them as detrimental because they're women and like they're under very strict rules. But I also think too, whenever, at least in my opinion, whenever like I see someone wearing their hijab, and they're like fully covered, all you see is like their eyes, and they're just gazing too, and we don't know what their emotion is, I guess.
So yeah, a lot of us in the West are challenged by the sight of a veiled woman who can see us, as we see them, but who maybe seem less approachable or less readable, in terms of their expressions. If all we see is the eyes, then we are kind of challenged to understand, what their reaction is to us.
I think that there is also probably some element of maybe not fear but uncomfortableness, because we have a lot of negative association with the Islamic culture just as our own culture.
Yeah.
So without knowing what the writing means, and there's a gun in there, and there's probably a good amount of not good feelings with it.
Right. So negative associations might include fears of
like terrorists and
of terrorism, in the wake of September 11th and the attacks, this linkage in the Western imagination between militant Islam and global terrorism, terrorism specifically targeting Westerners or Americans. Neshat, even though this was created in 1994, so it's before September 11th, but there was a prior history of media representations of Islamic extremism and linking it with terrorism, the hostage crisis during the Reagan years, for example, or during the Carter administration, then on into the Reagan years. So, Neshat is clearly, has to be aware that these are associations that many of her viewers will bring to the works. And the text remains unreadable to most of those viewers. What are some other, so, you know, what are some other negative associations that many people in the West bring to the sight of a hijab or a chador, these coverings that cover up the face of the women who wear them, or cover their bodies? Why might that evoke negative perceptions or stereotypes? You know,
I think it's just because we're scared because of like, this is like going to be like a question way or an answer way out there, but I think after 9/11, I think everybody was scared, and to this day we are. And I think with that association is that, I don't know, like they're a terrorist and they're like hiding something, or something bad's gonna happen.
sure. Okay, right. So yeah, there's that continuing association with terrorism. Is there anything else that might cause Westerners to criticize the wearing of the veil? Our perspective.
Well, because we as a Western culture have decided that, well, not decided, but am I muted? No. Okay.
No, I can hear you.
Okay, good. That we've decided that it's very empowering for women to, you know, shed their clothes and women's empowerment and, you know, taking off clothes and stuff like that. And, you know, to them, we see it as, you know, very like controlling them. You know, they don't have that freedom. We feel that way about them, but maybe they don't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That is another very common trope in Western media and media representations of Islamic societies. The representation of traditional Islam as very patriarchal, as very as oppressive.
Yeah, oppressive is the word I was looking for.
Towards women, yeah, and restricting their rights, requiring them to dress modestly, on the assumption that the women would prefer to dress differently or might choose to dress differently, or that the strictures that are placed upon the visibility of the body and the woman's body relates to a very kind of traditional or aggressive attitude towards women's sexuality. These are the assumptions, not saying that these are accurate, but or certainly not in every case, but these are commonly held views, let's say, in the West. And so we can ask, and one of the discussion questions I received from Victoria poses very well, like when we see the rifle here, when we see it juxtaposed with the veil, how do we read it? Do we read this as an image of women's oppression, or do we read this as an empowering image, an image of a woman who is empowered? And what kinds of clues or what kinds of visual evidence might enable us to try to come up with an answer to that?
So I kind of see it as a little bit of both. And the image of the rifle really kind of, in my opinion, presents in a promise of violence, and the idea that she's going to act out in response to an oppression that she feels. I personally feel like this is pointed towards Islamic societies in the vein of freedom of expression and being able to be free to be yourself.
Okay, so we could see this. That's great. We could see this maybe as a as an attempt to reclaim this language, this politically charged language around martyrdom and militancy from its usages, its kind of official usages or its officially sanctioned uses in the Iranian context, and direct it towards a different target, towards the problem of women's oppression. That I think is a reasonable reading of the image. If we see the gun, the rifle, as substituting for the woman's speech in a sense. The title of the piece is Rebellious Silence. So that, that could be one way of looking at it. And of course, there's also the text, which in a photograph, where the communication is restricted to the visual register, that text could take the place of speech as well, in a sense. Certainly the woman's gaze does not suggest that she is cowed or oppressed, at least not by us, right? It's a very direct, forthright gaze. But, that's just one reading, right? Are there other ways of interpreting the image or interpreting the title of the piece?
I mean, like was already said, it could be also seen as they are oppressed and they're trying to fight back, or like it's a very like, to me, her eyes kind of seem a little bit like staring at nothing, like dead inside is a good description for me. And it's like, maybe like a cry for help, but sort of.
Okay. So you kind of agree with Graham that this suggests maybe a critique of Iranian society, the patriarchal nature of Iranian society, or the oppression of women in Iranian society.
It could, like, just from like say you have no context and you don't have the reading to go along with it and you don't know what the writing means. I showed it to my mom actually, and she, that was the first thing she thought, was she was like, wow, that's really, powerful. It's kind of like a cry for help. And I was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah. Well, does knowing the content of the text or the context of the text change our interpretation, or how else could we see, who else could be, who else might the artist have in mind as a target of criticism or critique here?
Well, I know terrorist groups started using women to lead like terrorist attacks because people wouldn't expect it and they get away with more just because they're a woman. I don't know if it would be like her being a part of like some terrorist organization.
Okay. So there is, for example, there's a famous scene in a movie, a well-known French movie called Battle of Algiers, which is about the Algerian War for Independence. When Algeria was still a French colony, the independence struggle at first took the form of acts of terrorism against the colonial government and the military occupation and so forth. There's a very memorable scene in the film where a woman is dressing herself and putting on the veil and going outside and walking up to this checkpoint, and she's carrying a bomb. So I think that is a very vivid image or idea. You know, that's something that kind of captures the Western imagination. The idea that women might be taking part in this kind of militant action or terrorist violence. And that could take us to another way of looking at the image. I mean, here in the West, we, you know, many of us, I shouldn't say we all the time, but it's common in Western media representations of the Middle East to represent women as powerless and as deprived of their rights. But there is this tradition, especially in the early years of the Iranian Revolution, of women taking an active role and being empowered in the cause of political struggles, you know, independent struggles for independence or for, you know, democracy. I mean, the outcome of the Iranian Revolution may not have been to make Iran a democratic country, but in the early stages, there were certainly people who believed that it had that potential, and they had very legitimate reasons for criticizing or opposing the regime of the ruling Shah. So, you know, just as another possibility to consider, we might think about whether or not this image is really addressing Westerners and challenging us to rethink our assumptions about the powerlessness or the passivity of Muslim women, of you know, women in Iran or other societies in which you know, traditional forms of Islam are dominant, suggesting another capacity for rebelliousness or for speech, for self-expression that we might not expect or might not recognize. All right, so another maybe related image, this one featuring this henna body painting that is commonly used as adornment, primarily for you know, female adornment on festive occasions, given a different kind of significance maybe here in the context of this image, again with the juxtaposition with the sign of violence, the gun. Here again, we've got the barrel of a gun, which seems to be pointing at us from the shadows of this woman's face that is, again, overwritten in Farsi. So this image also poses, or this work also poses the question of how we're to understand the work's title, Speechless. And more brings in for comparison a work by another Middle Eastern artist, artist in exile, we could say, and this, you know, theme of exile maybe harkens back to our earlier discussion of Nigerian artists in the West, some of whom were forced to leave the country due to, you know, violence, civil war, political upheaval, and that kind of thing. Mona Hatoum is a Palestinian artist, so, you know, the occupied Palestinian territories are this, you know, they are this disputed territory, disputed between the Israeli government, which claims them as a part of Israel, and the Palestinians who claim it as their homeland. And Mona Hatoum like Shirin Neshat, has made her career in the West, but her parents, still live where she grew up, and she is largely, was able to communicate with them by letter or by telephone. She did not get to see them. As far as I'm not sure, if she ever had a chance to visit them or not, but certainly, their ability to connect was restricted in this way. So she made this work called Measures of Distance, which is a video work, and it is made up of images mostly of the artist's mother, nude, sometimes in the shower, bathing herself, that have been on which the artist has superimposed the Arabic script of her mother's letters. And the content of these letters, they all have to do with, the nature of this work that Hatoum created, for which she asked her mother to send her photographs, something that the artist's father was not very happy about. And so this tension between the artist's mother and her father over this issue of nudity and these images of the mother's nude body formed part of the content of the letters that they wrote back and forth. So her mother's letters said, I do this even though your father does not approve of it, because, I think this is important, that we, there's work that you're doing, important for your art, and also, we as women have ways of communicating that men don't necessarily understand, or don't necessarily, have to follow the rules established by men. So it's a very personal piece, and the text is very personal, unlike the text in Neshat's work. So, this is interesting at the one hand to have these two different artists using similar techniques or similar strategies. And it's worth considering, maybe what common ground they share that might help us understand the significance of this use of text, but also, clearly they're using it in very different ways. They're using different kinds of text, and they are creating very different kinds of images. So the relationship between image and text is interesting. Does anyone know, has anyone studied anything or read anything about the history of Islamic art, who might be able to talk about, the status of the image in Islam, or maybe what makes Islamic art different from, say, Western European Christian art from the Renaissance up through more recent times? I don't know if anyone took classes with Karen Britt when she was teaching at Western. She taught classes on Islamic art. What's one thing we see in Christian art that we generally don't see in...
It's religious, like symbols or like stories, I guess.
So
Christian art has a lot of Jesus, like,
yes,
and an absurd amount.
Christian art does have a lot of Jesus. It also has, depending on which type of Christian art we're talking about or which period in history, has a lot of the Virgin Mary,
Mhm.
has a lot of saints and other holy figures, and you don't see that in Islamic art.
Isn't there, if I remember correctly, like you're not allowed to have any sort of depictions of Muhammad or anything like that? I wonder if
Yes.
that applies to all figures of Islamic religion or just like the big ones.
So there is a very strict prohibition on images of God or images of a prophet in Islamic art, and that has been generalized. And I'm not an expert in this topic, so I don't want to commit myself to a statement that might not be accurate. But at the very least, that prohibition has been generalized so that in most traditional Islamic art and design and ornament, you don't see images of people. You might see images of animals. You do see images of animals. You see images of lush gardens. These are the kinds of imagery that you find decorating mosques. For example, it's very rare to find. And it depends also on cultural context, like the situation in Indian art under Islamic rule is a little bit different, maybe because there were other cultural traditions which came into play. But you practically never see figurative imagery, representations of human figures or the human body in works of religious Islamic art, for religious contexts. Only in secular context is it occasionally seen, but it's a very by and large, Islamic art is what's called aniconic. It doesn't feature any imagery at all. In fact, it's purely abstract. So a lot of geometric ornament and a lot of calligraphy. So in many contexts, text takes the place of the image. And an artist working, an artist from one of these cultural traditions working in the idioms of modern art or contemporary art, especially in the West, is maybe challenged by this this cultural divide, this cultural barrier. How does an artist from Iran or a Palestinian artist make work that make visual art that references their own cultural traditions and puts it into dialogue with the West, when there isn't that same, when the histories of visual art and ornament are so different there. So I think text plays a role, maybe of identification with that tradition, and also while also serving as a different kind of metaphor. I mean, text is maybe a more transparent vehicle for communication in a lot of ways than imagery. Images are often ambiguous. Text is generally meant to be clear and immediately understandable. But when you have a language barrier, then of course text can also come to stand for those sorts of barriers to communication. The text of these letters that connects Mona Hatoum and her mother are also what maybe maintains a certain kind of barrier between the viewer and the subject of their correspondence, even though the video has a voiceover in which the artist reads aloud in English from the letters. in Neshat's work, in their photographs, we don't have that voiceover. So the text remains unreadable to the majority of Western viewers, non-Farsi speakers. And it becomes as much a veil, you could say, as the actual physical veils worn by these women in these images. So the status of the body, the status of women's bodies in particular, and the cultural significance they carry is a major theme in Neshat's work. And it's interesting, you know, the majority of these images feature women, of course. The series is called Women of Allah. But when you do see, you know, male figures, they also serve to define women's role in a sense, and or maybe question that definition. So, you know, women are defined by their social roles as mothers. And so we have a male child here, but there's this strange kind of reversal taking place where this feminine adornment, this henna body painting that is, you know, worn by women on their hands or their arms, here decorates the male child, and the woman remains completely covered. And this leads into another discussion question contributed by Caitlin, right? So Caitlin was asking this third question here. There's a stigma that the woman bears a symbolism of their cultural identity. More challenges in Neshat's attempt to demystify this idea. Do you agree that Untitled, Mother and Son falls short of Neshat's goal? So Caitlin, since we have you with us, maybe you could tell us what you were thinking when you came up with this question, or how you understand Moore's interpretation of this work.
What I remember from the reading, because I did this Sunday morning, I think, was that Moore briefly mentioned, and I'm trying to remember where, but briefly mentioned that, you know, every other picture of her seems to be, you know, a woman with a gun in the face, and, you know, kind of, you know, I think on Moore's side being like the women are fighting type thing. Mm-hmm. And this one kind of is completely different from that. Mm-hmm. And I think Moore may have said that, let me try to remember. I think she said that it was like opposite of what she's trying to do. And I was like, well, I don't know if I'm not sure if it is or not. I was kind of curious.
Okay. I mean, the opposite in the sense that it's not, it doesn't represent women as militant or
right. This is yeah, we have a young child with, we're assuming, a woman underneath the woman's garb, and you know, it doesn't say the same thing.
Yeah,
is what Moore is saying.
Yeah. What do other people make of this image or this idea that you know, or what kind of statement maybe is the artist making here about these traditional social roles or the gendered division of society, male and female? Any thoughts?
Like, the woman has this job to raise the male, but she's like trapped like under all these clothes, like still doing this. Meanwhile, like, the boy can be like kind of free in a way. Mm-hmm. It's her job to raise him that way while she's still like imprisoned, I guess, to being like covered.
Okay. Yeah. So the boy becomes the stand-in for all of these possibilities of self-expression or of freedom that, you know, it seems like the woman here is denied. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah.
So does that go along with what she's been saying in her other work, or is this, you know, hurting it kind of like Moore was implying? I think Moore was implying anyway.
So yeah, you think Moore was saying so the difference between this work and Neshat's other works, you're saying has to do with the way the woman looks disempowered here?
Yeah, if I think, again, I could be totally wrong in my interpretation of what Moore was saying, but Moore was challenging that this was actually, you know, quote unquote, like fighting for women picture. It was kind of actually opposite of that. And I was saying, I don't know that it is. And like my kind of explained, this was still showing that different side. It isn't the militant side, but it's still, you know, I think it's still fighting for women in a different way, or showing, you know, what they're going through or something like that.
Okay. Right. Yeah, it's still making a statement.
Right. And I think Moore was thinking, at least in that one paragraph that I can't remember where it is, was mentioning that it seemed counterproductive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what do other people have reactions to this image, or what would you make of it if you didn't know anything about the artist? Kind of a strange image.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that that the little boy has henna, because whenever I see henna, I associate it with women and females, not particularly males. But I don't know if males do wear it, but I know it's mostly like women.
Right. So that's significant, right? Because it kind of feminizes the appearance of the little boy, right? And so the little boy becomes, on the one hand, maybe an extension of the woman's own sort of ornamentation. You could say it's almost maybe a stand-in, you know, the boy becomes a stand-in for this restricted ability of women to beautify themselves or display themselves or express themselves. On the flip side, though, it's a strange sort of gender-bending performance where, you know, the woman becomes the silent, you know, invisible sort of authority figure, and the boy becomes this kind of decorative object, which is emasculating. You know, it subverts this idea of, or this traditional opposition between male strength and female passivity. So there are all these two different codes that are being kind of crossed here. There's the traditional gender codes and also the cultural codes. You know, Neshat is flipping the script in terms of gender in different ways in these images, but she's also constantly aware, I think, of the fact that we may struggle to interpret these images as Western viewers if we don't know the source of these traditions, if we don't, maybe if we're not clear on the fact on whether or not henna is a purely feminine type of adornment or not. It might leave that question open in our minds. She compares these works, focusing on the veil, with works by other contemporary Middle Eastern women artists, Zainab Sadira's self-portraits of the Virgin Mary. Her work often features these kind of mashups of Christian, our historical traditions and Islamic customs or imagery or tropes, maybe causing us to look at our own cultural tradition differently. Images of the Virgin Mary are often veiled or heavily covered in like Renaissance art, let's say. But we don't identify that connection when we are comparing Islamic art and Christian art. Or Janan Al-Ani's Veil. This is a slide projection featuring these 5 different women in which the images, they sort of fade and come back into focus. And sometimes the same woman appears, the image shows her veiled, sometimes unveiled. So it's this, I haven't seen the work in person. This is based on verbal descriptions I've read, but it's this sort of slow experience of veiling and unveiling, in which we don't have any kind of script or any kind of narrative that would enable us to understand what how to read these changes. So this could make for an interesting comparison with Neshat's Women of Allah series. Because it kind of, I think, forces us to ask, what is it that is actually being concealed? Or are we making too much of the veil, as Westerners? The title of Neshat's photograph on the left here, I Am Its Secret. We may not know what she means that to refer to, but this whole idea that the veil conceals something, that there is a secret there to be found, this suggests the long-standing fascination in the West with the mysteries, of the East, the Middle East, or the Far East, the secrets, that this kind of fascination with everything that strikes Westerners as exotic about these societies, and Islamic women, as viewed from the perspective of the Western male gaze, become this object of fascination, kind of fetishistic fascination, because they are mysterious, because they are secret somehow. So you have this whole history of artistic representations in European art and also American art to some degree of the Oriental harem, the concubine, all of these odalisques from the time of the 19th century, artists like Ingres and Delacroix, down through modernism, the odalisques painted by Picasso or Matisse. So, challenging these forms of exoticism or Orientalism, as it's sometimes called, I think might be another motive that we could impute to Neshat's work. All right, and that brings us to video projections. And these are probably the works that Neshat is best known for today. These are the difference between a video projection And other types of video works that we've seen have to do partly with scale. You know, video projection can be projected on a very large screen, and more generally on the way we experience these works in space, in the space of the gallery. So most video projections take the form of an installation where the artist determines exactly how the screens are going to be arranged. And that's definitely true of Neshat's work. Many of her works take the form of two-channel video projections. Two channels mean there are two different video recordings or films that are being projected simultaneously on different screens. And in several of her works, including this one, Turbulent from 1998, the two channels are projected on facing screens on opposite sides of a room. So if you walk into the room, this may be what you see on one end of the room, but facing it is another screen on which is projected the other channel, and they're meant to play simultaneously. So it's a way to, you know, create an additional kind of dimension or layer to the image, where rather than simply, you know, being addressed to a viewer, you have these two facing projections that maybe play off of one another in different ways. And I wanted to share this video with you because you can find it on YouTube, but I was not able to figure out a way to play this using, you know, sharing my screen so that you can hear it. And it's crucial that you hear what's playing. So I'm going to take this this link and put it in the chat here. And I would suggest then that we let's see. I would suggest that we all just watch we take like a 5-minute pause here to watch it, and then we can come back and discuss for a few minutes, and that will be it because it's already 1:40. So I'm going to stop or pause the recording and just invite everyone to open that up in your browser and watch it. But while watching it, so in the YouTube video, the two channels are shown side by side, but you just have to remember that if you're actually experiencing the work in person, they'd be on facing walls. Let me just see how long this video is, in fact. It is, oh wait, this is only 2 minutes. This is not the full thing. Or is this just the ad? Maybe it's the ad. Oh, it's 9, okay, so it's 9 minutes. All right, well, all right, so if I can ask for your indulgence, yeah, just watch the whole thing, and then we'll meet back here in 10 minutes. I mean, I'll just keep the Zoom meeting going, and we will discuss it once you've had a chance to watch the video. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
To watch, but when it gets to the female, you can really show that it's really playing a lot with the Iranian government's, like, their laws. So like women are forbidden to sing, So that's one of it, because
in public. Yeah.
Yeah, an indicator of that is just because she has an empty auditorium, and with what she's saying, it's just like cries and wails, but it's more like, think of it as she's a voice of the women who are voiceless, trying to
Yeah.
like what I guess their interpretation of it. So like a lot with has to do with the gender roles, cultural
Right.
things. So like I think that's what she's really getting at, because with the male he has a lot of an audience there, and with her she has nothing, and with him he's actually singing, but with her she's like wailing and crying, and it's very like peaceful, but it can also be very daunting because hers is specifically being like a voice for a group of women who cannot do that.
Yeah. What did other people think? Do you have the same reaction or other thoughts, interpretations?
Well, first of all, I want to make the comment. I was a little bit reminded of Yoko Ono, just a little bit.
Yes. Didn't think of that, but
Scream Against the Sky. Yeah.
I honestly hate that piece from her. I thought that was the worst thing she's done. It's awful.
I will reserve my judgment, but I thought it was very interesting. I didn't know about the law that they couldn't sing in public, so now that makes a little bit more sense to me.
The empty auditorium.
Right.
Yeah, referencing that.
But I mean, he was kind of doing similar sounds that she was a little bit, and then she just kind of went on a whole nother level with it. And how much of that is traditional song of, well, not song of the country, but like, I know their music's a little bit different than ours.
Yeah, so I can tell you that the male singer was singing a traditional love song, and musically and in terms of the lyrical content, it is part of the repertoire really of the musical repertoire of the culture. What the female singer was vocalizing was not, as far as I know, rooted in any tradition other than, I guess you could point to sort of informal or certain types of
Is it like called like melismatic? It's like a single syllable of text which is sustained through like multiple notes.
I'm
like
familiar with that term, but that sounds like it's relevant or would apply. What I was going to say is it also could evoke the ululation of which is of women who it's a similar kind of vocalizing, which does not contain words, but it's it's a term that's used to describe these sort of typically female vocalizations under certain in specific in specific contexts, like grieving for somebody who has died or something like that, as an expression of grief or as an expression of collective feeling or something like that. So there may, I guess, be some there may be some points of reference for that type of vocalization, but it's definitely not directly based on anything like that, and it's not part of a kind of sanctioned or codified musical tradition. It is outside of those institutions or those those cultural traditions. So
I just felt like it's very rebellious in a way that she did that.
Yeah, and I think my personal response to the piece has been when I hear the male singer perform, I'm impressed by the performance, and more specifically by the feeling that he puts into it, not knowing the meaning of the words or the story that they tell. Like I listened for those kinds of nuances, and it seemed to me that he's singing with a lot of feeling, and I relate to that. But when she begins to sing, it makes his performance seem stilted and kind of formulaic by comparison, because of and obviously they're, you know, the sounds are manipulated or you know, probably digitally modified in the studio so that it sounds sometimes like she's singing with, you know, 100 voices rather than just a single voice, as if she's singing for all women, as you said, Tina, or suggested. But you know, the intensity of emotion in her performance just completely blows away whatever I thought I you know, was getting out of the male singer's performance.
I preferred hers more than the males. Like, I was not really intrigued by his at all. Like, it was nothing. And I've never seen this until like now, but I feel like hers had more. There was like more. There was something to it that I feel like people would have gravitated to.
Right.
If they didn't know what it was about.
And I think it's meant to be more powerful. You know, I mean, we are meant to make this comparison. And you could say that you could see it as a protest against the restrictions imposed by the Iranian regime on women's, you know, women's art, you know, women's ability to create art, to perform before an audience. But I think you can also see it as a kind of rebuke to our stereotypes and preconceived notions of women's roles in these society, where we feel if they aren't allowed to sing in public, you know, this is just another indication of how completely disempowered they are. I think it's maybe possible to look at the video as from a different perspective and see it as suggesting a different kind of empowerment, maybe that one that we're not necessarily we're not really kind of able to easily recognize or appreciate, you know, coming from our own cultural perspective. But I just wanted to conclude with a couple more of these discussion questions that I think are relevant to discussion of Neshat's work as a whole. There are some other video pieces which you don't have time to watch. What I am going to do, I'm going to put the links to those works in the chat, and you can watch them. I'm assuming these links still work. I haven't checked this one recently, but you can view it on your own time if you're interested. Because I think all of her video projection works are really interesting, and they all kind of provide another perspective on her artistic project as a whole. So this one is, oh, sorry, I never responded to your message here, Tina.
No, it's fine. As soon as I typed it up, Maya said she was done, so.
This is a 1999 work, Rapture. And then we've got this from 2000 called Fervor. So I do recommend checking out both of these as well.
On Thursday, are we going over our exam?
We are.
Okay.
So Chloe asked, several interesting questions. One, you know, as an Iranian artist based in the United States, how is Neshat's work influenced by Western feminist ideals? And maybe we kind of touched on that a little bit. But there's also, she contributed this question: what is the significance of Neshat's focus on the human form as a subject in her works? What do we think about that? Because, you know, in Turbulent, this video that we just watched, the singing is obviously a major component, but also the these two figures, the male singer and the female singer, the whole time that the male singer is performing, the female singer is veiled, right, or is invisible. The whole time that the female singer is performing, the male singer is watching her very attentively. He turns back to his own audience as if he is watching her from across the room. What do we think about that?
I think it's kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about, the man and the male, or whatever. I'm very tired, so my brain is like all over the place. But they have the freedom to do what they want, I guess, and she had to be, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying. Like, the, you know, partly is a way of getting at these questions of male and female role in society, right? You know, you have to have that differentiation, you know, also in the photograph of the woman with the little boy. The human figure is important because it provides a means for exploring all these different kinds of difference, you know, sexual difference or gender difference, but also maybe difference in age in that particular case, as well as cultural difference. You know, these bodies are marked culturally as belonging to a society that is not our own. And so, you know, the human figure, it's not necessarily that these are individualized characters or personalities in her work. Sometimes they stand for a larger group of people, a society or a collective, or a gender. But they are crucial for exploring these issues of what we could call maybe like anthropological difference across cultures and across the division between, you know, the male-female divide. All right, and then Kristen also posed a question about the script often seen written on a woman's body. What is the significance of the script being inscribed on the body versus if it was just in the background or written on paper? Maybe we can conclude with this question.
I think if it's written on a body, it tends to be more powerful than it is as like on a giant background, because I think with the human body, it's more of a personal matter rather than if it's like written on a wall.
Sorry, I forgot to share screens here.
Well, when we were discussing the picture of the mother and son, or the woman and the boy,
Yeah.
we mentioned that the writing on the, or not the writing, but the ornamental henna on the boy kind of made him an object, or something like that. And so I kind of think the writing is a similar, we can treat the writing as a similar thing.
Also in these other images, like this one or these.
Right.
Because maybe there's a difference between the decorative function of the henna tattoos, temporary tattoos, and the texts. All of these works, and even in Turbulent, which doesn't feature writing, of course, but does feature words, you know, the words that are sung versus the sounds or the vocalizations. It seems like it has to do with these possibilities of expression, of self-expression, as well as communication. So, you know, maybe we can understand the communicative function of text, regardless of where it's included or how it's included. Text communicates, but if it's when it's superimposed on the body, we see it as display, as expression, as also as covering, you know, so showing or sharing something, but also covering something up. And especially when it's in a different language, you know, it becomes a barrier. It's like another form of veiling, right?
Yeah.
We think we see this woman because we see her face. We think that by, you know, getting rid of the veil, maybe we will be able to understand or communicate better with these women of another culture. But it maybe is our own cultural prejudices that cause us to think that way. Because it's not really, you know, it's not really simply a matter of what we see, but of what we understand. If we don't understand another person's language, maybe that's more of a barrier to communication. And that's a barrier that we impose, you know, if we're not willing or able to take on the task of learning another culture's language or of translating, then we are the one who are guilty of you know, of this you know, it becomes our responsibility to bridge the gap rather than, you know, requiring it of the other person or you know, demanding it of you know, the Iranian woman featured in the photographs. All right, so the two other videos that I provided the links for, one is one of them is filmed in, or maybe they're both filmed in Morocco, and it has certain similarities to Turbulent, the one that we saw. The other one tells a kind of story, Fervor, where you have a somebody delivering a sermon, you know, preaching about the sinfulness of woman. And the worshipers are divided into two sections. There's the male seating area and the women's seating area, and they're screened off from one another by this partition or this fabric that prevents them from looking across. But there's one man in the audience, one woman in the audience whose paths cross, and they're you know, thinking of each other during this sermon. And then the woman leaves, and the man follows her. So check those out, you know, if you're interested. And there's a lot of other stuff on Neshat online. And I think that'll do it for today. So thank you for your comments and questions, especially for the discussion questions. And on Thursday, we will be talking about the exam. So I will have more information to share with you at that point. I still have not entirely figured out what's going to be covered on the exam or how I'm going to format it.
Multiple choice questions.
I want to make it. I don't want to make it intimidating or scary or stress-inducing.
Don't add short answers because that's scary.
You mean the short essay?
Oh yeah, that's scary.
That's scary.
My grammar
All right.
is scary. That's why.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll make sure to make it at least partly multiple choice.
Yes.
That's my goal here, is not to scare you guys.
I appreciate that. The rest of my classes are not doing that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess some people think they need to work harder and make you guys work harder to make up for the lack of face-to-face interaction. But
Exactly.
I've been sleeping, so.
yeah.
I was recently telling my mother the other day that I don't think I know what boredom is during this quarantine. I've just been constantly working on art projects that were extra.
Yeah, I know. I feel like all these people are talking about how much time they have now to play video games or watch movies or TV.
I wish.
I'm like, I wish I could say that, but somehow.
Man, I'm still going to work, so you know.
Yeah, right. And then there's that. For those of you who are
Essential.
working, and yeah, those of you who are required to work.
I mean, you can say students are essential because we have to go to do schoolwork. So.
I mean, yeah, I think it's all essential, right?
Makes
Everything
sense,
that we're
essential.
doing here is essential. We're just having to figure out new ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. Let's stop here then.
All right. See you Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. I will see you all Thursday.
Okie
Bye, Zach.
Bye. Thanks, Graham.
dokie. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you guys.